Today's passage is from the letter to the Philippians, chapter 3, verses 1 to 14, and we celebrate the conversion of St. Paul. This passage is a lovely one to focus on for this festival. It's one of the sunnier moments of Paul's letter writing, and just in this one passage there's a lot of wisdom, sound advice and good example. Paul's conversion was dramatic, as you probably know, a complete turnaround from persecuting the church to becoming one of its chief advocates and most prominent missionary. Here he outlines his credentials as a Jew before that point, credentials which would have been impressive in his culture, impeccable. These days we might say he'd been to the right schools, he knew all the right people, he belonged to the right clubs. He'd arrived. He could hold his own in any company. As he put it, he had every reason for confidence in the flesh, on the human, earthly level, in human society. Those kind of qualities generally give one advantages in life. They're one of the reasons, I suppose, why society is not equal. Our equivalents today would be different, but you can easily imagine what they might be and what kind of person might describe themselves in this way, like Paul, with this kind of confidence, with this kind of pedigree. So it's remarkable that Paul, having listed all this impressive CV stuff, goes on to say it's all rubbish, garbage, fit for throwing out. His vocabulary is that blunt. I've lost it all, he says. His status as a Jew was lost because when he went over to the Christian cause, it meant that he was cast out, excommunicated from synagogue after synagogue, wherever he went. I've lost it all, but who cares? It's worthless anyway. Remarkable. And the reason he felt this was because of his conversion, which burst on him like a lightning strike. He was struck by the truth of Christ with such an impact that it changed everything for him. He realised that the basis of his faith and his relationship with God up to then was misplaced and misconceived. He had been wrong. It takes a brave person to acknowledge that, and a very brave person indeed to do so in public. From that moment, Paul preached the gospel of God's grace, which says that we are all equal before God, equally in need of God's grace to restore us into relationship with God, regardless of our culture, background, race, age, gender, or anything else at all. And moreover, to receive that grace, we need to be aware of our total need of it. Recognise that we don't bring anything to the table with God to bargain or trade with. All that stuff, that human prestige and status stuff, Paul realised, was like garbage when it comes to my standing before God. It's as if God is blind to all that. Like the father in the story of the prodigal son, who didn't see his rags or smell the pigs on him. He'd been living in the garbage which the pigs ate, but saw a beloved son as soon as he turned back to his father and immediately restored him into that relationship. Well, as I often seem to say, this is good and bad for us. It's bad if we want to rely on our own credentials of education or profession or income, or on the image we like to project through the car we drive or the house we live in or the clothes we choose. I'm afraid Paul would call all of that garbage. But it's very good indeed if we don't have any of those status symbols, or if we do have them, but we recognise how trivial they are, how little they actually matter when it comes to our own value as human beings. If we value or measure ourselves or anyone else in those ways, we're making a big mistake. Could we say it's a bit like judging them by going through their rubbish bins and looking at what's there? Instead, Paul reminds us that all that really matters is that Christ Jesus has made me his own. Not what he or we have done or what we are, but what Christ has done for us is what matters, which Paul describes as the surpassing value of knowing Christ Jesus as Lord.